I am Vittoria Chierici, and I was born in 1955 and in Italy, in Bologna. I spent most of my time in Milano, where my father was a oil driller, and in Milano there was the oil company, the offices of the oil company, the Italian oil company. So I was born in a family of engineers, and except my mother, who was an English teacher and an expert of English poetry. She actually wrote 2 books about Lord Byron. I grew up in an environment of technicians. And at a certain point of my life, I was very young. I wanted desperately to be a painter, and I was like 10 years old. And I started trying to have private classes, lessons, and I couldn't because my family didn't want to. So I had a very big conflict all my life because of this choice. Eventually, after the grammar school, the high grammar school in Milano, I went to the university in Bologna, which is a very famous university, and there was a new department, new faculty, opened by Umberto Eco and other very big intellectual in Italy. In 1972, they opened a new faculty, and I enrolled. And this faculty is called DAMS, which means Discipline of Arts, Music, and Theater. And I went there, and I studied there for 4 years. And I studied with the best intellectuals in Italy at that time, which were Thomas Maldonado, Umberto Eco, Renato Barilli, all the best. And then after graduating in art history from that special experimental school, I decided to go to the United States. And in 1979, I went to Berkeley University, and where I followed some classes in art history, in particular some classes about German expressionism. But I didn't want to stay in California, although I was very protected by my family's friend. I used to live in Walnut Creek, I remember. It was beautiful, but I wanted to come to New York because I knew that New York for the arts was much better. I'm talking about the beginning of the 80s. And there in New York, through my professor in Italy, I decided to start a PhD program, and I have been accepted by Columbia University by James Beck, who was at that time the student advisor at the art history department at Columbia University. I'm talking about September of 1979, by the end of 1979. So it was very fast. From January to September, I was in California. Then I was here in New York, and I started a PhD program. I started to study, to do some tests that required, and I had a very interesting subject, which was the immigrants from Europe during the 20s, before the 30s, and I'm talking about artists who immigrated here. So it was very interesting, the subject, but I haven't finished because I wanted to be a painter. I've always been very stubborn, and I went to the School of Visual Arts, and I started taking classes there until 1981, until I actually started showing my work. All of a sudden, I decided to just learn on the field instead of learn at school, and I started in 1983 actually in Italy to show my work. In the 80s, the situation in Milano and in Turin, in Rome, was very, very active. And we had young people like me, we got together and we founded a small movement. And we actually had also some international exhibitions. I would like to underline this because I come from the conceptual art. I do not come from actually the painting field. And so I have art history on one side, and on the other side, conceptual art. And I've been supported by some collectors who actually, they really collected just conceptual art. When I decided to work on a subject, an historical subject, like the Battle of Anghiari by Leonardo da Vinci, was really something that I did because I liked it. And I stepped on a different side from the conceptual art of young people in Italy at that time. And I started in 1996. So I was far away from all my friends. My friend continued to work also with big galleries. I remember some of them are now very famous artists, also at an international level, and we did a lot of group shows together in the 80s. But then I decided to get away and to work by myself, which lasted almost 10 years, which was a long trip by myself. I did this not in Milano, where I had started painting. I was married that time, but in Bologna. I went back to Bologna and I took a studio there. And I had some money, invested in quite a big research on Leonardo da Vinci. The subject I took is a subject about war. And this is very important because I started thinking of war for two reasons. One was the Gulf Desert Storm War. I think it was in 1992 or 1991. And I remember that I used to see for the first time in my life this connection that, with actually Peter Arnett was the name of the journalist who was talking from Baghdad. And I was very surprised. It was the first time in my life to watch TV and this and know that at the same time they were bombing a town, a city. On one side, on the other side, I'm a daughter of soldiers, and all my grandfathers, in particular, were military. They did the career in the Italian army. They were colonels. So I always had memories about war, also because I was born 10 years after the end of the Second World War. So for me it was pretty fresh, the memory of the Second World War. Before painting the Battle of Anghiari, I did a lot of paintings about battles. See, the battles in painting is a gender and history, especially for the 19th century. And it's also for the Renaissance, if you think about Paolo Uccello, if you think about Piero della Francesca, and also what Benvenuto Cellini wrote about the Battle of Anghiari and the Battle of Cascina by Michelangelo. It was considered the school of war. As in a style, he was talking about style, actually, because in a battle you have so much movement and so many characters and so many planes, let's say, that it's really, the composition is really the main subject of a battle. If we talk about painting and style, technique and style. So I decided that battle was not only a subject which was both contemporary and historical. And this is my art in general is based on these two levels. It has to be something that biographically speaking had inside me. inspires because of my my biography, my life, and at the same time has to be also something that is rooted into a platform of a cultural contest. Okay, so this for me is very important. The two levels. I've started in 1996 to think of the Battle of Anghiari. The Battle of Anghiari is a secco. It's not a fresco. It's a mural that was supposed to be in the Palazzo Vecchio, Sala dei Cinquecento, which is the main hall of the city in Florence still now, and painted. It was supposed to be painted by Leonardo da Vinci, but it was quite a failure because for 500 years no one found these traces of this work. But the paradox is that the Battle of Anghiari has become famous during these 500 years just because they didn't find it. So the mystery on one side and the research, there are people who still are searching the real one. And the third issue is the copy. There are many copies of the central part of the project by Leonardo. And the most famous is the one by Rubens, although it's scholars have discovered that this watercolor is not really by Rubens, but is a print that Rubens painted over. The mystery is because Leonardo had never finished, first of all, the project. He did the central part of the painting, which is the clash for the standard of the banners. And he did some episodes, let's say second episodes, but then he left Florence and he tried to actually start painting, and there is a legend that he did a wrong mix of colors. I do not believe in this. I believe in documents, like all the historians and scholars. So since we are not very sure. But there are some witnesses. There are some people who actually saw the horses by Leonardo, they say, and it might have been copies because they started to copy this cartone, the drawing, students of pupils that came from Spain, from other countries, and so the cartone was seen, actually, but we don't have any documents about what really happened. And this is a very interesting. The other interesting thing is that Vasari, the architect and painter who restored the Palazzo Vecchio in the early 60s, we are talking about 1500, he probably covered if something was there. And and before Vasari, actually, when the Medici came back to Florence, that big hall was returned to his origins, which was to be a military place for the Medici's private army. So it's been through a lot of obstacles, and so the mystery is that someone says many historians and they made some research, reconstructions, and that there must be something there, I'm not interested. I'm interested to some extent. I was interested in the composition and the actuality of the concept of war. Although this is a medieval war, it's more contemporary to me to see the clash of horses, which is a metaphor, than to depict or paint a contemporary scene, a contemporary world scene. For me, it was much more important. The Battle of Anghiari was a trip. It was really like going somewhere far away, not just because of the subject in itself. It's not because of Leonardo. I'm not a scholar of Leonardo. I like him very much, but sorry, I'm not a scholar. I like his way of working on projects. The concept of projects that had Leonardo is very, very modern, more than whatever you can say about him, and there's a lot. But this mentality that he had to approach every subject through a project, it was really, really interesting. Also artistic projects. So that means that he did experiments, and he did experiments also on the Battle of Anghiari, not only on the Last Supper, and it means that actually he lost in this case, because nothing is supposed to be on the wall unless they don't find something. And because he experimented, they used to experiment colors, a new technique. In this case, I suppose that he tried really to paint as if we're painting on a oil panel, on a panel for wood panel for oil colors. A secco, we say in Italian. That means with oil colors. So we don't have much about the painting, but we have a lot about the drawings. And what I did it was to study the drawings, to study all the drawings that have been attributed to the Battle of Anghiari by scholars. And I took 10 of those. Some of them are at the Windsor Castle, and some others are in Italy at the Academy of Venice, Academy of Art in Venice. And I've been working on these 10 drawings, composing, and put them on different planes according to the story. I mean, I didn't invent anything, although I didn't discover anything. I didn't do this to get the truth in history. My work was a sort of game. It was a game of composing. I tried to, on different actually levels, I had a narrative level. So that means that I went through everything that has been written about the Battle of Anghiari, not only Leonardo's story, but also the battle in itself. It was fought in Anghiari. This was a beautiful place near Arezzo, and the battle in itself was for the June 29th, 1440. And of course, it's a very complicated matter, because after Leonardo started in doing the cartone, which is the big project on paper, sheets of paper, he started with the central part that is called the Lotta per lo Stendardo in Italian, the fight for the standard, the banner that was very important, and this is a medieval battle. And what really struck me was the movement of the horses and the clash of the horses and the knights. And so I decided to take all these drawings that I was talking about and do not reproduce them by hand, but by photography through the computer. And I just blew them up, enlarged, because they are actually very small, very short, although they're very much detailed. You can see inside each drawing everything, a little sword and anything, all the details about the warriors. And I wanted to enlarge, and I want to keep as they are in Leonardo drawings. First of all, because I think Leonardo was the best drawer ever. Well, we have Picasso in our modern time, but really Leonardo was an incredible drawer. And I didn't want to interpretate his drawings. See, this is very important because I had someone who asked me why you didn't do by yourself. You drew by yourself the characters of Leonardo's Battle of Anghiari. I said, no, it could have been not this as strong as it is. So I made a choice of working with media. Actually, my work is a mixed media work, where painting is very important because painting gives motion, gives life. And colors also very important. Colors and paint for me is really something that shapes motion. But drawings, it's another thing. And drawing is the projectual part of the painting. And I use Leonardo's drawings. Anghiari is a castle. And there is a beautiful land a flat land between Anghiari and Borgo San Sepolcro, which is another famous place in Italy because of Piero della Francesca. So it was really an artistic journey, an historical artistic journey. I went there, I took all the picture of the landscape because there are no hints by Leonardo about the landscapes. And then I composed everything with the computer and into the computer. And I would like to add something. I had finished a film school in 2 years before. I was one of the first students at the New York Film Academy. Now it's a big school, but at that time we were a bunch of foreigners, tourists, I would say. And that helped me very much because I could really compose as if I were a director in a way on my canvas. See, my computer was my cartone. Like in the old times, you had this sheet of paper glued together, and I would better say in Italian, cartone, and then they used it to make a sinopia or a copy on the fresco. The challenge, when I started this project, I knew that it wasn't it couldn't be accepted by the world of new conceptual art, a world I belonged since I was young, because it was painterly done. I really like a fast brushstroke. I wouldn't say I'm an expressionist. I would rather say I'm an impressionist. A new kind of impression, and I learned how to be so fast and to give the idea of movement because of the impression. Although I like very much the American artists of the 40s and the 50s, I like them very much. So I had a lot of difficulties in showing my work. And I started doing by myself. With the help of friends, I started doing also quite big shows, as I did in Arezzo. But I was alone. I did solo shows for a lot of, still now I do solo shows. And I remember that my other colleagues did group shows or Biennale or Venice, things like that. I've never had invited to this for two reasons. First of all, because the subject was historical. And second, because it was painterly done, and in Italy that time, painting was not accepted. It was accepted here. It was a big movement like Transavanguardia or the new painters here in the 80s. But not in Milano or northern Italy where I was living that time. And the other challenge I had was the subject. War is not something that you put on your dining room, I don't know, in your collection. And I remember some dealers, they told me, how do we sell a work like that, which has this kind of subject, so difficult. And some other people asked me if I were a fascist because I painted a subject like this. I said no. This is something that belongs to humanity, first of all. It's not just a war, but it's something more. It's a metaphor. It's very emblematic. I'm talking about the Battle of Anghiari. And Leonardo himself did a very symbolic work. One of the group, the central group that he drew, there are some horses that actually they bite themselves, they bite each other. Enlarging these drawings, which are very, very tiny, you can see the movement of the neck of the horse. They show an animal fierce, crudelty. So there's such some levels that are nothing to do with the war in a political way, but the war in the sense of human ferocity or human evil, and also not a human, also animals in this case, of course, because so the Battle of Anghiari was for me very, very metaphorical, nothing to do with supporting a war but I had this kind of critique from many, many sides, also from people who knew me very well. I'm a peaceful person, and I know nothing to do with war in an active or a political sense of my work. So I think these were the main challenge that I had to face in history. The historical subject, which was not accepted as a contemporary and avant-garde subject by the conceptual artist, and on the other hand, the subject in itself, the war,